I'm at the bank making money, making moves. Machines with tools and drills, making grooves. Missions impossible.
What is up, investors? Welcome back to In the Green with Charlie. Today, my guest is Investor Community Manager Nick Albert. He explains his journey to Invstr and goes into detail about many aspects of the app. Here is our conversation. Hey, Nick, how are you doing today?
Doing very fabulous. It's a Friday.
Nothing better than a Friday. So let's start by learning about your experience investing. What was the first time in your life you invested in the stock market?
That would have been back in 2001, I believe.
And how did that experience in 2001 go?
All right. So at the time, I was working for Wells Fargo, and you were able to buy shares of Wells Fargo stock for a premium price as an employee. The Oracle himself, Warren Buffett, wanted to get a bigger chunk, so he dumped a ton of Wells Fargo stock, and the stock went down. And I thought, well, I work here, I should buy some more. A couple days later, he bought a larger chunk, and the shares skyrocketed. So I did very well because of good old Mr. Buffett.
There you go, the Oracle himself. So what's the path been since 2001?
Because I was living in San Diego at the time, and there was quite a bit of pharma going on as far as with cancer research. I was one of those, I think I'm going to be the next millionaire. So I jumped in on some things that I probably shouldn't have jumped in on, and then FDA approval didn't come through. So my dreams of being a millionaire at early 20s were squashed. But because I was so young and my risk tolerance was so high, I jumped back in. Here and there, nothing major. And then in 2009, 2010, I ended up the company that I had been working for running. We had been purchased by a Fortune 50 company. And so I kind of went in big on some of the FANG stocks early on. So yeah, it's done me very well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure no complaints there. So then how did you find out about Invstr?
So I was working for a fintech startup on a contract role when I was back in San Diego for 3 months dealing with some stuff. And when I came back to London, I ended up being headhunted to come in and meet with Karim, the CEO, and James, the CCO, and had a really, really good time chatting about things with Karim and James. James is he's like the father of all of us in the office, which is a good thing. But I really liked the direction that they were hoping to be moving to at a certain time. And this was early on. This was a couple of years ago. So I was with them for about 3 months. I went off and I ran a marketing agency for a couple of years. And then James and I had been having a conversation. And he's like, hey, why don't you come back in and talk to Karim? We're doing a lot of the stuff on the education side now that we had been talking about forever. And, sitting down and talking to Karim and seeing kind of what the vision was for Invstr and kind of knowing what path they wanted to take really brought me in to where I was like, yeah, this is definitely something I want to get back on board with. And so I just passed 1 year back at Invstr 9 days ago.
Awesome. And what did the app, the very first time you had any experience with Invstr, that first time you interacted with Kareem, what did Invstr look like?
It was a lot different than it is now. Fantasy finance hadn't been launched yet. So it was a different type of gameplay and how the education, we didn't have Academy. There was a lot, it wasn't chat. There was so many things that we've added, especially just over the last year, that have really created that atmosphere of learning, which I think is, it's a core value, but for me, it's one of the reasons it keeps me around is because I have seen so many young people lose so much money because they don't know what they're doing and they try absolutely moronic things. And if you don't have a high risk tolerance and you're not like, okay, well, I can always make more money, it can be really kind of disheartening. And I think where we're at now and what we've got coming up in the future is just all about that, education side of it. And yeah, it really gets me pumped for what's coming up.
What is your specific role at Invstr?
So I am head of community management. So everything that kind of happens inside the app from a community perspective, i.e., if something comes up that doesn't look right, I'm jumping on top of it. I'm dealing with all of the active users in one way, shape, or form. I think there's 50 something thousand people that follow me on Investors. So I'm constantly getting DMs basically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I had taken a day off and I was still answering DMs on my day off just because there was things coming in where people have questions. So it's all encompassing of being that community management manager for our ever growing community.
As the community manager, I'm sure you're in a ton of interesting leagues. What are one or two of the favorite leagues you're in?
James has a very in-depth league if you want to get into technical analysis and understanding a lot of different aspects, whether it be pharma or tech. I believe it's Infinity Sign and then Swirl. The guy that runs that one is James. Of course, Christine's league, that's the wannabe TTS, not VHS and Friends. Absolutely adore that league. I have a league that a lot of the super users are in for just like new instruments to be added to the app. So they're constantly saying, hey, I just saw this, or hey, did you see this IPO? Hey, are we going to get this on? So it's really about fresh, hot, new things to be able to add to investors so the community has more things. I mean, we got 2,000 plus instruments now, but I'm constantly adding anywhere between 20 and 30 instruments every week.
What does that process look like of you adding a new instrument?
Okay, so I have to go through and build out everything that I can build out from a perspective of getting the data together that relates to the instrument, what sector it's in, a short description, logo, all that kind of stuff to be able to put in the app. We have to pull the codes to be able to actually get the data from the exchange. And then the dev team have to actually then build it into the app as part of that. It's a really in-depth process, hence the reason why we do it about 20 at a time instead of doing like 500 at a time. The manpower behind it is pretty intense in order to get it done.
One thing I've heard people talk about was in earlier versions of the app, there was like a lag, but now that doesn't exist. Could you talk about what that was and how that was fixed?
There used to be delayed data. There's some instruments that you would have that would be international or even some on NASDAQ that are actual delayed data. So you can't actually buy the live data. Because of which there was the opportunity to arbitrage specific instruments, i.e., really gain by playing that model. What we've done now is we've removed anything that's not live data to where everything that you're looking at is live. We get it directly from the exchange. I am constantly monitoring anything that looks like prices might be too slow or it might be different to make sure that we have the exact right data. So it's a constant for me when the markets are open. I'm usually have two screens wide open and I'm just staring at the market trying to see if there's an issue.
Gotcha. And now shifting a little bit to talk about your experience and what you've gotten out of Investor. What are some of the ways you've seen yourself grow through using the app?
One of the biggest things is I'm more willing to try out different sectors. So for me in real life, I was always pretty set on, okay, I'm going to go with like pharma and I'll go with tech just because those two things had more of a I can understand them better and the research wasn't that difficult because there was a lot of news about them. But what I've ended up moving over to is now, in the app and in real life, I spend a lot more time looking at different sectors and getting a better fundamental understanding of them. And I've found that in my app brokerage, I tend to stick to different sectors that I normally never would have went with. And I mean, I'm up 222% year to date as of about 3 minutes ago when I checked it.
That's awesome. So, what's an example of a sector that you now are investing in a lot that you didn't have much experience with before?
Anything that's related to renewables. So I'm really looking at renewables across different sectors, whether it be like EV or solar, hydrogen. There's so many different opportunities there, especially for somebody who's young trying to get into things, to look at the sector and see if it actually gets your interest going. I found as well is that if a sector interests me, I'll do more research.
So now looking forward to the future of Invstr, what's one or two things you are excited about going forward on the app?
I'm excited about what we're doing on the brokerage side. We're constantly looking at our brokerage partner and reviewing them and seeing how we can make the partnerships that we have even better, whether it be through crypto or through the brokerage. And then we have something coming up from an educational side that will answer the question that I'm asked probably 50 times a day by new users on Invstr is, what should I invest in? And we have something coming out that I can't really spill the beans yet, but it answers that question. So that's something that in the background we've been working on quite a bit, and it looks like relatively soon we'll be able to start beta testing it and then get it out to the masses.
I know I'm excited for that. You mentioned you get a lot of DMs. What are some of the craziest things you've gotten?
Actually, James and I were talking about this just the other day. I had somebody that was sending me something about how I just gotten out of prison and I used the money that they gave me when I got out of prison and I put it to my brokerage account and I'm already up 15%. So thank you for creating this wonderful app. It caught me off guard because I had never had a conversation with this person ever. I've also gotten people who just don't like me, and they don't like me for whatever reason it'll be. The amount of horrible pictures and rude comments that I've received is actually funny. I'm extraordinarily thick-skinned, so for me, I just laugh it off. It's not really a big deal. But yeah, that kind of stuff happens pretty regularly, and just got to deal with it and move on.
My goodness, I had no idea you were such a controversial figure.
I didn't either.
So finally, do you have any last thoughts for the investor community?
The one thing I would say, and this is something that I try to reiterate to everybody who ever asks me, what should I invest in? First off, I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm never going to tell you, hey, go out and buy stock A, because it might not fit with your investment strategy. And, going through Academy, it talks about investment strategy, and it's just a smart thing to do. Even if it's just write down where you want to be in 5 years from your portfolio. And if it's even only like I got $100 to put in there. Okay, where do you want that $100 to be in 5 years? Another thing is just do research. Find a sector that you're actually into, whether you're into video games. Look at whether it's video games ETFs or companies that make video games. If you're into cars, look at those. And just really embrace that sector, because you'll find these shining diamonds that can, someday maybe be something big, but also can make you a little bit of money time after time after time. All you got to do is kind of hold on to them. Patience is key.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you said about being excited about something, because that makes you much more eager to do a lot of research on something if you're into cars or whatever. So I think that's a great tip. Thank you for coming on the podcast today, Nick.
Thank you for having me, Charlie. Appreciate it.
All right.
Machines with tools and drills making grooves. Missions impossible.
I am not a financial advisor, and my comment should never be taken as financial advice. Investments come with risk, so always do your research and analysis before.